This is Heliox, where evidence meets empathy. Independent, moderated, timely, deep, gentle, clinical, global, and community conversations about things that matter. Breathe easy, we go deep and lightly surface the big ideas.
Today, there is this massive, highly vocal community on the internet claiming that human gender roles are just, biologically hardwired from birth.
Right. It's a very prevalent idea right now.
Yeah, and the argument basically goes that, stretching all the way back to our earliest ancestors, men are naturally dominant, like hyper-competitive hunters, and women are just inherently passive homemakers who operate entirely in the background.
It's a very specific, very rigid framing of human evolution.
Exactly. But when archaeologists recently managed to extract ancient DNA from the graves of Iron Age steppe warlords, we're talking about people who were buried with massive iron swords, sacrificed horses, and literally thousands of pieces of gold.
Oh, yeah. Incredible wealth.
Right. Well, they found a piece of genetic data in those graves that completely shattered that modern theory.
Which is fascinating because we constantly see this pattern in human history, right? Where people look to the distant past to somehow justify the present.
Oh, absolutely.
There is this pervasive assumption that if we strip away modern civilization, our species just reverts to some primal, rigid, factory setting of human behavior.
I think it's just our default mode.
Exactly. And it is a very appealing way to view the world if you are, say, trying to argue that certain social hierarchies are just natural and inevitable.
And we are going to put that exact assumption to the test in this deep dive. Because if you, listening right now, have ever heard someone casually drop the phrase, boys will be boys because of biology, or argue that some ancient evolutionary instinct dictates modern dating apps,
then you've definitely brushed up against this exact theory.
Yeah, you have. So our goal today is to examine these modern claims about human nature, and then we're going to cross-reference them with physical, empirical evidence.
The hard data.
The hard data. And to do that, we are looking at three incredibly detailed sources today. First, we have a psychological thematic analysis of massive modern internet forums. Then, an archaeological study of ancient Roman agricultural engineering.
And finally, a really cutting-edge genetic study of nomadic societies from the Eurasian steppe.
So it's a real process of separating the mythologies we construct about human nature from the actual material reality of how our ancestors lived, how they structured power and managed their societies.
Okay, let's unpack this. I think we have to start by looking closely at how these modern internet communities actually construct their worldview in the first place.
Yeah, let's dive into the first source. It's a comprehensive psychological thematic analysis of two major message boards from what is often referred to as the Manosphere.
Right.
Specifically, the researchers looked at a forum dedicated to the red pill and another one dedicated to incel ideology.
Yeah.
And I was looking at methodology here, and the scale is just staggering.
It's massive. They analyzed almost 400,000 words of text.
Which is wild. How do researchers even begin to accurately quantify and analyze that much raw internet conversation?
Well, it requires a highly rigorous methodological approach known as a thematic analysis. So psychologists do not just, scroll through the posts and guess at the general vibe of the forum.
Right. It's not just an impression.
No, not at all. They use specialized qualitative data analysis software to process the text. They're searching for semantic networks and recurring linguistic patterns.
Yeah.
And they develop what's called a coding scheme. Basically, it's a set of strict definitions for specific concepts or beliefs, and then independent researchers will read and tag the data based on that scheme.
So they have to make sure they're all on the same page.
Exactly. They have to establish what is called inter-rater reliability, which ensures that multiple scientists actually agree on how a specific phrase or post should be categorized.
Got it.
And only when a concept appears with statistically significant frequency does it actually become identified as a core theme.
Okay, so it's incredibly systematic. So when they applied this whole framework to these hundreds of thousands of words across these two forums, what did they find as the foundational belief?
Well, according to the analysis, the foundational text of these communities is a strict reliance on a concept known as biological essentialism.
Biological essentialism.
Right. This is the belief that evolutionary psychology entirely and inescapably dictates all modern behavior.
So we're just completely bound by our caveman brains.
That's the idea. In their view, because early human ancestors supposedly lived in this brutal survival of the fittest environment, our brains evolved to be hardwired for a very specific, rigid set of gendered survival strategies.
Okay, so how does that evolutionary framework actually translate to how these forums specifically view women? Because the study highlights a very distinct categorization, right?
It does. The researchers found that these communities view women collectively as having three innate biologically driven motives. First, to be deceptive.
Wow.
Second, to be promiscuous. And third, to trade sex for social and financial power.
That's bleak.
It is.
Yeah.
The researchers categorize this worldview under established psychological frameworks, specifically hostile sexism and adversarial sexual beliefs.
Okay, wait. I want to make sure I understand that term. What exactly does adversarial sexual beliefs mean in a clinical sense?
It refers to the expectation that heterosexual relationships are fundamentally and inherently exploitative.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, in this worldview, men and women are essentially locked in a constant evolutionary resource war. Women are characterized in these forums as this homogenous group lacking independent agency.
Just totally driven by these biological directives.
Exactly, driven purely by the directive to manipulate men for resources. In fact, the thematic analysis notes the really frequent use of the term hypergamy on these boards.
Hypergamy.
Yeah.
Right, I've heard that thrown around online. What's their definition of it?
They define it as this uncontrollable biological programming in women to constantly seek a higher status mate, even if it requires deceiving their current partner.
So I'm trying to picture how this operates in practice for these users. Is it sort of like a really poorly coded video game where every non-player character, like every NPC you encounter, only has one single underlying motivation and literally cannot deviate from that script?
That is actually a very accurate way to visualize their framework. It removes individual human agency entirely and just replaces it with a biological code.
Okay, so if women are viewed as this giant monolith driven by a single code, how does the thematic analysis say these forums categorize men?
They categorize men just as rigidly, but instead of a monolith, they place them into a strict, biologically determined hierarchy.
Like a ladder.
Right. So at the top, you have the alphas, which the forums sometimes refer to as chads.
Right, chads.
Yeah. And according to the coding in the study, these are defined as physically attractive, sexually successful, dominant men who just inherently command resources.
Okay, and who is below them?
Below them are the betas. In this ideological framework, betas are considered weaker providers. They are the men who supposedly have to trade their financial resources and emotional labor in exchange for access to relationships.
And the analysis points out a very specific third category, right?
Mm-hmm.
Particularly on the incel boards.
Yes. So incel is a portmanteau for involuntarily celibate. And the individuals in this specific subforum categorize themselves as genetically inferior to both the alphas and the betas.
So they put themselves at the very bottom.
At the absolute bottom of this biological hierarchy. They express the belief that they are entirely shut out of what they term the sexual market, usually due to their physical appearance or bone structure or social neurodivergence.
Interesting.
And the researchers define this specific state as a form of marginalized masculinity.
Okay, so how do the users on these two different boards operate within that shared framework? Because if they both believe the world runs on this strict biological ladder, do they react to it in the same way?
Actually, no. The thematic analysis reveals a really sharp divergence in how they respond, which is fascinating from a psychological standpoint.
How so?
Well, the users on the Red Pill forum exhibit what psychologists term high agency combined with hostile masculinity.
High agency meaning they think they can change their status.
Exactly. They believe that through extreme effort, they can literally force their way up the hierarchy into that alpha category. The study details their focus on rigorous physical weightlifting, maximizing aesthetics, and practicing really severe emotional restriction.
Emotional restriction, like not showing any vulnerability.
Right. They operate under the belief that showing any vulnerability or emotional reciprocity immediately assigns you to the beta category. So they treat relationships purely as strategic, calculated transactions.
Wow. And what about the incel boards?
The incel boards respond with profound fatalism. Because they believe their position is genetically locked, they do not attempt to change it.
Because what's the point in their eyes?
Exactly. They embrace a philosophy they refer to as the black pill, which is basically the acceptance of permanent hopelessness.
That's incredibly sad.
It is. And the psychological analysis traces how this total lack of agency often spirals into severe depression, suicidal ideation, and frequently violent rhetoric.
Violent rhetoric directed at who?
directed outwardly at women and also at people outside their community who they call normies.
It's incredibly sobering to read the methodology and see how thoroughly these communities have built out this entire architecture of belief.
It's a very complex, very insulated ecosystem.
Yeah. But what really strikes me is that the entire foundation holding this architecture up is the claim that this is how humanity has always operated.
Right.
Like they are arguing that this alpha-beta dominant-passive dynamic is an unbroken chain stretching from ancient hunter-gatherers directly to the modern day.
That is the core justification. They rely entirely on the idea that human history and evolutionary biology validate their social hierarchy.
Which brings us to the absolute most important question of this deep dive. If this is the claim, right, that human virology strictly hardwires women to be passive domestic actors and men to be dominant resource controllers,
Yeah.
what do we actually see when we look at the historical and archaeological record?
A very different picture.
Right, because if evolutionary psychology is as rigid as they claim, we should see that passive domesticity reflected clearly in ancient history.
Exactly. To test a theory about human nature, we cannot just rely on philosophical arguments or internet lore. We have to look at the material reality of the past.
We have to get our hands dirty.
Yes. We have to examine how ancient economic, social, and political systems actually function on the ground.
Which takes us out of the modern internet and directly into the dirt of the ancient world.
Let's do it.
We are shifting to our second source, which is a detailed archaeological and historical journal article reevaluating the role of the Roman villica.
This is a great historical case study.
So we are going to the Roman imperial period, roughly the 1st and 2nd centuries CE. And to set the stage for you listening, what exactly is a Roman villa in this specific context?
It is really important to discard the modern idea of a villa as some sort of luxury vacation home in Tuscany.
Right, it's not a summer house.
Not at all. In the 1st century CE, a Roman villa was a massive, highly complex agricultural business. These were commercial enterprises oriented toward generating significant surplus production and serious financial profit for the estate owner.
Okay.
And the villica was the female manager of this estate. She was often an enslaved or freed woman functioning alongside a male manager, the villicus.
Now, here is the part of the source that absolutely fascinated me. Because for a very long time, modern historians fundamentally misunderstood what the villica actually did.
They really did.
Yeah, the article points out that prominent scholars, even in the late 20th century, explicitly defined her role as just a housekeeper.
Right.
They painted this picture of a woman who stayed indoors, cooked meals, folded linens, and basically just managed a few domestic servants inside the residential house. They entirely walled her off from the profitable outdoor farming operations. How did historians get it so wrong for so long?
It is a classic case of historiographical bias. You see, modern historians did not arrive at the housekeeper conclusion by looking at the physical archaeology.
Okay, so what were they looking at?
They arrived at it by misinterpreting the primary textual sources. The most extensive ancient evidence we have detailing the actual duties of the villica comes from a 1st century Roman agronomist named Columella.
Columella.
Yes. He wrote a massive, multi-volume technical manual on farming, and he dedicated his entire 12th book to outlining the job of the villica.
But the historians tripped over the very beginning of the book.
They did. Columella begins Book 12 with a literary preface. And in this preface, he quotes a Greek philosopher, Xenophon, who lived about 400 years earlier.
Oh, wow. 400 years earlier.
Yeah. And Xenophon had written this famous text about a fictional 14-year-old elite Athenian wife, basically explaining that a woman's natural, biologically ordained place was indoors, safely out of the elements, weaving and baking bread.
So let me get this straight. Modern historians read that philosophical introduction, assumed it accurately described the reality of a 1st century Roman working farm, and essentially just stopped reading the text critically.
That's pretty much exactly what happened. They let a 400-year-old Greek philosophical ideal about how a teenager should behave completely blind them to the reality of what was actually happening on the ground in Rome.
That is wild. Because if you keep reading Columella's manual, like past the preface, into chapters 4 all the way through 59, he drops the Greek philosophy entirely.
Completely abandons it.
Yeah. He transitions into this highly technical breakdown of the villica's actual day-to-day job. And I was reading the excerpts from these chapters in our source. It has absolutely nothing to do with folding linens.
It is a profound shift in tone. Columella places the villica in charge of immense industrial-scale agricultural operations.
Let's talk about the specific mechanics of what she managed, because the source goes into incredible detail. First, Columella puts her in charge of the torcularium. What is that?
The torcularium was the pressing room of the estate, and it is crucial to understand the scale here. This was not a small room with a little hand-cranked kitchen gadget. A commercial Roman pressing room housed massive, heavy machinery. We are talking about colossal wooden beams, complex lever systems, and huge stone counterweights used to crush grapes and olives by the ton.
By the ton. That's industrial.
Very industrial. These facilities were heavily engineered spaces designed for sheer output, often spanning thousands of square feet.
And she wasn't just managing the extraction, right? She was managing the chemistry. The text says she was also responsible for the cella venerea, the fermentation halls.
Yes. The cella venerea housed rows of enormous terracotta pots called dolia.
Dolia.
Right. And a single dolium could hold upwards of 1,000 liters of wine, and they were often partially buried in the ground to regulate the temperature.
Oh, interesting. So it was like early climate control.
Exactly. The villica was managing the highly technical and, frankly, highly volatile process of fermentation, because fermenting tons of grape juice produces massive amounts of heat and carbon dioxide.
Right. It's a chemical reaction.
Yeah, and if it's not managed correctly, the wine spoils, or the pressure builds up dangerously. She was also overseeing processes like making defrutum, which involved boiling down grape must in lead or copper vats to concentrate the sugars and act as a preservative.
So she's not just a manager. She's essentially a food scientist.
This required an intimate knowledge of food science and thermal regulation, yes.
I am just trying to process the scale of this.
Yeah.
This sounds significantly less like a domestic housekeeper and much, much more like a modern-day supply chain manager or an agricultural CEO.
That is a much more accurate parallel for her actual economic function. She was driving the primary commercial output of the entire estate.
And she was doing all of this outside the house, because Columella specifically details that the villica was constantly moving through the outdoor workyards.
She was everywhere.
Yeah, she was sent out to the sheepfolds, the ox stalls, the stables. During shearing season, she was responsible for counting the fleeces to ensure they matched the number of sheep.
Which implies something very important about her education.
Right. It implies she had to be highly numerate, if not functionally literate, just to manage the estate's accounting and inventory.
Exactly.
And the source also notes she oversaw the winter butchering, which sounds intense.
Oh, the butchering and the processing of meat was a massive undertaking. Slaughtering the pigs, draining the blood, and the subsequent salting and curing of the meat, all of that would have taken place entirely in the open air, utilizing these large, multivalent workyards.
Okay, so we have this text from Columella detailing all of this heavy outdoor industrial management. But how does the physical archaeology of these Roman sites back up the text? Like, does the dirt actually match the document?
Perfectly. It matches perfectly.
Wow.
The source article examines the excavations of major Roman villas across the empire, places like the Villa of Arignano in Italy and the Villa of Damblane in Roman Gaul. And the physical footprint of these sites proves that they were strictly divided into two zones.
Okay, go over the zones.
You had the Pars Urbana, which was the elite residential zone. That's where you find the mosaics, the dining rooms, the private baths.
The luxury part.
Right. And then you had the Pars Rustica, which were the massive agricultural work zones.
And the article points out how physically massive these work zones were. I mean, at the Villa of Damblane, the archaeologists found that the Pars Rustica was separated from the residential zone by a masonry wall that was 80 meters long.
It's a huge compound.
Yeah. So the villica was not confined to the fancy residential quarters. And the artifacts archaeologists are pulling out of these workyards are not like delicate domestic pottery.
Not at all.
They're finding heavy volcanic millstones, industrial kilns, iron butchery cleavers, and massive wine amphorae.
Exactly. But there is one more critical layer to her role that we need to examine, and that is her ritual authority.
Right, the religious aspect.
Yes. The ancient Roman statesman Cato the Elder, who wrote a manual on agriculture about 2 centuries before Columella, specifies that the villica was responsible for a very specific religious duty.
What was it?
She had to sweep the focus, which is the central hearth of the estate, and she had to supplicate the lares, which were the household gods.
Now, when I first read Sweeping the Hearth in the source, my modern brain immediately categorized that as just a standard cleaning chore. You know, just tidying up.
Right, sweeping the floor.
Yeah, but the source stresses that this was something much, much more significant.
It was immensely significant. We really have to view this through the lens of the ancient Roman mindset.
Okay.
In their worldview, religious ritual was not merely a symbolic gesture. It was viewed as highly practical, necessary agricultural technology.
But technology,
Yeah.
like a tool.
Exactly. The Romans operated on a system of contractual religion. The Latin phrase is "do dis," which means I give so that you might give.
Oh, so it's transactional.
Very transactional. Securing the favor of the gods was considered just as essential to achieving a profitable harvest as proper irrigation or crop rotation or pruning the vines.
That makes so much sense.
So by placing the villica in charge of communicating with the lares, the estate owners were literally placing the ultimate economic survival and prosperity of the farm squarely in her hands.
So let's connect this back to our first source for you listening, because the thematic analysis of the Manosphere highlighted this really rigid belief in biological essentialism.
Right. The idea that history proves women are naturally biologically programmed to be passive domestic objects.
Yeah, that their only real leverage is like manipulating men from the shadows. But that entire theory just seems to completely disintegrate when it hits the reality of the Roman villica.
It completely falls apart.
I mean, here we have a woman acting as a highly skilled, financially literate, economically vital manager of a massive commercial corporation. She is commanding laborers, she's operating heavy machinery, and she is directly driving the profit of the empire.
There is absolutely nothing passive about her.
No.
The material evidence forces an absolute rejection of the biological essentialist narrative. The idea of this natural order of male dominance and female passivity that these internet forums rely on, it is demonstrably a modern projection placed backward onto history.
But what if we push this even further?
Okay, let's push it.
Because, yes, the Roman villica held immense economic power. But she was still often enslaved or operating within a patriarchal Roman legal system.
Right. That's true. Rome was a strict patriarchy legally.
So if we really want to test the absolute limits of these biological claims, like the idea that men are the only natural rulers and conquerors, we need to look at raw, centralized, institutionalized political and military dominance.
And that is exactly what our third source provides.
Perfect.
To test the upper limits of political power, we are leaving the agricultural estates of Rome, and we are moving significantly eastward out onto the vast expanse of the Eurasian steppes.
All right, so we are looking at a groundbreaking study published in the journal Science Advances, and it focuses on the Iron Age Scythian nomads who lived between 900 BCE and 200 BCE. Before we get into the actual DNA, who exactly were the Scytho-Siberian cultures?
So they were these massive confederations of nomadic tribes that completely dominated the steppe. They are archaeologically renowned for their intense mobility, their unparalleled mastery of horsemanship, and their highly distinctive, really intricate animal-style art.
Okay.
But above all, their landscape is defined by their burial structures, which are known as kurgans.
And the scale of these kurgans is difficult to overstate. The study notes that some of these earthen burial mounds were up to 15 meters high.
Which is massive.
Yeah, that's the equivalent of a 5-story building, constructed entirely of earth, measuring over 100 meters across.
Just incredible engineering.
The engineering and the sheer amount of organized, centralized labor required to construct just one of these mounds is staggering.
It really implies a highly organized society.
Exactly. And inside, they feature these complex timber chambers, sometimes secondary chambers exclusively for sacrificed horses, and they were filled with breathtaking wealth.
So these were not common graves.
Not at all. These were the resting places of the absolute elite, the individuals at the very apex of the social and political pyramid.
And for decades, one of the most famous archaeological discoveries from this region has been a find known as the Golden Man.
The Golden Man. Tell us about him.
So he was discovered in the Issyk Kurgan in Kazakhstan. And this individual was found buried with over 4,000 intricately crafted gold ornaments.
4,000.
4,000. Plus a massive iron sword decorated with griffin heads and a bronze mirror. Now, for a long time, the biological sex of this individual was debated based purely on skeletal morphology.
Because sometimes it's hard to tell from just bones.
Exactly. But this new DNA study finally provided conclusive genetic confirmation that the Golden Man was biologically male.
Which, if you are a user on one of those modern forums, seems to perfectly validate your theory, right?
Oh, they would love it.
Right. It looks like the ultimate historical proof of the alpha warrior king buried in all his gold. But the researchers immediately introduce us to another figure in this study that significantly complicates that narrative. Let's talk about the Princess of Urdzar.
The Princess of Urdzar is a remarkable find. She was discovered in a similarly massive 16-meter-tall kurgan dating roughly to the 4th or 5th century BCE.
Okay, so same time period, same massive scale.
Yes, and the opulence of her burial is just astounding. She was interred wearing an elaborate gold zoomorphic headdress, which, interestingly, is strikingly similar in its iconographic style to the artifacts found with the Golden Man.
So they were wearing the same symbols of power?
Exactly.
But she wasn't just buried with gold, right? The archaeologists also found a stone altar and the remains of medicinal plants in her chamber.
Which indicates a really multidimensional authority. She was not just a political or military ruler. The presence of that altar and those medicinal plants strongly suggests she also held immense shamanistic or religious authority.
So she wielded raw, centralized, institutional power.
Undeniably.
And the study makes it clear that she was not just some historical anomaly. This is where the science in this paper gets truly revolutionary. The researchers managed to successfully sequence the ancient genome-wide DNA of 85 individuals from across these burial sites.
85 is a great sample size for ancient DNA.
Right. And 38 of these individuals were pulled from the massive elite kurgans, and 47 were pulled from smaller, non-elite graves. Now, first of all, just mechanically, how do scientists even extract usable DNA from a skeleton that has been sitting in the dirt for 2.5 millennia?
It is a remarkable technological achievement because ancient DNA is highly prone to degradation and contamination from modern microbes. You breathe on it and you've ruined the sample.
Right, your DNA gets mixed in.
Exactly. So scientists typically target a very specific part of the skull called the petrous bone, which houses the inner ear.
Why the inner ear?
It is the densest bone in the mammalian body. And that incredible density helps protect the DNA inside from degrading as quickly. Also, the freezing temperatures of the steppe act as a natural preservative.
Oh, that's lucky.
Very lucky. So once they extract the material, they use a technique called shotgun sequencing, where they isolate the fragmented ancient DNA and computationally piece the entire genome back together.
Okay, so they piece together the genomes of these 38 absolute elites, the people buried in the 5-story mounds with the gold and the weapons. When they analyzed the biological sex of these ultimate rulers, what did they find?
Well, the sequencing revealed that 42% of the elite individuals identified in this study were genetically female.
Wait, I need to pause here because that statistic is staggering. 42%.
42%.
So almost half of the people buried in these monumental structures, surrounded by thousands of pieces of gold and heavy weaponry, representing the absolute pinnacle of social, political, and military power in this society, were women.
Almost half. It is a profound demographic reality that completely reshapes our understanding of power dynamics in the ancient world.
I mean, the forums we talked about earlier claim that women's only historical power was manipulating men for resources from the background.
Right.
But here we have literal Iron Age queens ruling openly, buried with the exact same symbols of martial and dynastic authority as their male counterparts. This doesn't just challenge the alpha male evolutionary theory, it completely obliterates it.
It shatters the premise entirely. The genetic data shows us a society where high-status females were monumental figures of centralized authority in their own right.
It's just undeniable physical proof.
It is, and the genetic analysis in the study goes far deeper than just determining biological sex.
Oh, they looked at more than just that.
Much more.
Yeah.
The researchers utilized an advanced genetic metric known as runs of homozygosity, or ROH, to understand how this power was actually structured within the society.
Okay, let's break down runs of homozygosity, because the term sounds incredibly intimidating. But as I understand it, it basically acts as a high-definition genetic footprint of your family tree. How does this metric actually work?
Well, to understand ROH, you have to look at how DNA is inherited.
Okay.
You inherit one set of chromosomes from your mother and one from your father, right?
Right.
When your parents are closely related to each other, meaning they share a recent common ancestor, they will inevitably pass down identical blocks of DNA to you.
Because they're pulling from the same genetic pool.
Precisely. These identical, unbroken stretches of alleles on your chromosomes are the runs of homozygosity.
Got it.
By computationally measuring the length and the frequency of these identical blocks, geneticists can determine if an ancient individual was the product of a consanguineous union.
Like first or second cousins intermarrying.
Exactly.
So by measuring these identical blocks, they can basically see the mating patterns of a society that died out 2 millennia ago.
Yes.
What did they find when they measured the ROH of the Scythian nomads?
The data revealed a really stark genetic divide. They found that the elite individuals buried in the massive kurgans had significantly higher levels of ROH compared to the non-elites buried in the smaller graves.
Meaning the elites were closely related to each other.
Precisely. The scientists calculated what is known as the effective population size, which is a genetic metric used to measure the diversity of a mating pool. And they found that the elites had a drastically smaller effective population size.
So they were deliberately keeping the bloodline closed.
Yes. They were deliberately practicing endogamy. They were marrying and reproducing within their own closed, exclusive social rank to consolidate power.
And the researchers were actually able to trace that consolidated power across geography, right? Because the study mentions they reconstructed a multi-generational family tree using this DNA.
They did, which is amazing. Through the genome sequencing, they identified an elite grandfather.
Okay.
He was a man buried in a massive kurgan, accompanied by gold artifacts. Interestingly, his skull showed signs of trepanation.
Trepanation, like a hole in the skull.
Yes, which in this context indicates he underwent an elite mummification ritual.
Oh, fascinating.
And using his specific genetic signature, the scientists were able to locate his direct grandchildren.
And who are the grandchildren?
One was an elite male, and another was an elite female. Both of them were buried in their own monumental kurgans, displaying the exact same level of supreme wealth and status as their grandfather.
Wow.
But the crucial detail here is that they were buried in a completely different cemetery, over 50 miles away from him.
I'm trying to process the magnitude of what that means for how we understand human history, because this completely reframes the idea of how power worked.
It really does.
Like the biological essentialist theory claims that power in early societies was won in this bloody generation by generation free-for-all, right? Where the most aggressive, physically dominant male just fought his way to the top of the pack.
The alpha narrative.
Right. But this DNA proves that wasn't happening here at all. Power in this society was inherited.
It was institutional.
Yes, it was institutional. It was deliberately passed down through closed family bloodlines across vast geographical distances, and it was vested absolutely equally in both elite males and elite females.
You have hit on the exact crux of the discovery. The biological data proves dynastic, institutionalized rule that simply did not discriminate by sex.
So let's synthesize exactly what we have uncovered in this deep dive.
Yeah.
Because it is a lot.
Took a lot of ground to cover.
We started by looking at a modern internet-born ideology. The thematic analysis showed us that massive communities on the internet rely on the claim that human nature is biologically locked into rigid, oppressive gender roles.
Right.
They argue that evolutionary psychology dictates men must be dominant conquerors and women must be passive, deceptive manipulators. And we saw how that framework leads to deeply fatalistic, hostile, and adversarial behavior in the modern world.
Real-world consequences.
Exactly. But when we systematically tested those claims against the material reality of the past, the facts told a profoundly different story.
Very different.
We looked at the textual and archaeological reality of ancient Rome, and we found women acting as the equivalent of modern agricultural CEOs.
Managing massive estates.
Right. They were managing complex commercial estates, operating heavy industrial machinery, understanding food science, and literally driving the economic engine of the empire.
And then we looked at the genome-wide DNA of the Iron Age steppes.
And we found women ruling as dynastic monarchs. We found them buried with thousands of pieces of gold and heavy weapons, holding absolute political and spiritual authority in equal measure with men.
Which shows us that history is not a rigid biological program. It is deeply, beautifully complex and heterogeneous.
Right. The material evidence overwhelmingly demonstrates that the rigid alpha-beta-passive dynamic is just not a historical reality.
No, it is a modern sociological invention that is being artificially projected backward onto our ancestors.
So for you listening, if you have ever wondered why learning about the nuances of Roman wine presses or the molecular structure of ancient steppe DNA actually matters to your life today, this is why. The stories we are told about the past directly dictate what we believe is possible for ourselves in the present. So the next time you are, reading a forum or sitting in a meeting, and someone tries to confidently tell you that a restrictive behavior or toxic hierarchy is just basic human nature or just evolutionary biology, this deep dive is your proof that you should always ask to see their sources.
Because the past is frequently weaponized to limit the present. I think a vital thought to leave on is this. We have seen today how massive, deeply felt mythologies and entire community identities can be constructed on the internet based on a complete misunderstanding of historical and genetic reality.
Yeah, totally fabricated.
Right. And it requires us to ask ourselves a really difficult question. What deeply held myths about gender, society, or human capability are you implicitly accepting today simply because everyone around you insists they are natural?
Wow.
What absolute truths of our current era will historians and geneticists 2,000 years from now look back on and realize were entirely invented?
That is the perfect question to leave hanging in the air. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the modern forums, the Roman estates, and the Iron Age steppes. Keep questioning the narratives you're handed and stay insanely curious. Heliox is produced by Michelle Brucker and Scott Bleakley. It features reviews of emerging research and ideas from leading thinkers, curated under their creative direction with AI assistance for voice, imagery, and composition. Systemic voices and illustrative images of people are representative tools, not depictions of specific individuals. Thanks for listening today. 4 recurring narratives underlie every episode: boundary dissolution, adaptive complexity, embodied knowledge, and quantum-like uncertainty. These aren't just philosophical musings, but frameworks for understanding our modern world. We hope you continue exploring our other episodes, responding to the content, and checking out our related articles at helioxpodcast.substack.com.